Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are looking at the Masters Top Cut of the Frankfurt Regional Championships that happened this past weekend. So far we have had a ton of best of threes, a lot of Alolan Ninetales, a lot of Goldengo out and about, and some really interesting teams. And here in Masters Top Cut, I don't think we're going to get anything different. We're starting with David Carr and Julian Freund. David Carr, a very successful Pokemon player, especially over the last 6-7 years. And then Freund over here with a relatively successful top at Utrecht. But with these teams, we have Arcanine, Espathra, Kingambit, Sneasler, Indeedee, and Hydreigon. This is the second Espathra that we've seen with the Lumina Crash, but Arcanine is the Terra Water with the Mirror Herb, Flare Blitz, Rock Slide, Close Combat, and Protect, and the Intimidate. Espathra with that Terra Psychic Life Orb, Speed Boost, Expanding Force, Lumina Crash, Dazzling Gleam, and Protect. Kingambit with the Terra Flying, Assault Vest, Defiant, Kowtow Cleave, Sucker Punch, Low Kick, Terra Blast, Sneasler with the Terra Dark, Psychic Seed, Unburn, Dire Claw, Close Combat, Third Chop, and Protect. That Psychic Seed triggering the Unburn when Psychic Terrain is on the field, thanks to Indeedee with that Psychic Surge, Terra Dragon, Rocky Helmet, Psychic, Follow Me, Helping Hand, and Protect, and then Hydreigon around things out with the Terra Ghost, Draco Meteor, Snarl, Taunt, Protect, Safety Goggles, and Levitate. So notably, this is actually, I think, the same exact team that we saw from a player a couple rounds ago. Don't remember the name, it's been a couple days since we did the video, but the Espathra was able to do quite a lot of damage, and Espathra here, one of those like kind of unexpected Pokemon that we've seen be pretty successful, and that speed boost ramping up Espathra's speed every single turn makes it quite a threat, as it's almost always going to be able to get early damage out very, very quickly. Just a single turn of Protect, just a single turn of Stall makes a lot of stuff happen there. For Julian here, we have Incineroar, Goldengo, Pelipper, Sneasler, Archaludon, and Rillaboom, a very standard rain team, something we've seen a lot of as well. The Incineroar is the Terra Ghost with Safety Goggles, Intimidate, Knockoff, Flare Blitz, Parting Shot, and Fake Out. Super standard Safety Goggles seems to be a little bit more on the trend this tournament. Goldengo is Terra Fighting notably here with Make It Rain, Shadow Ball, Protect, Nasty Plot, Metal Coat, good as gold. Metal Coat really only boosting that Make It Rain, but Goldengo stats pretty good. Wow! They went really fast through that. It's a pretty standard rain team. We're not going to go back and look at the rest of it. If we do see anything too crazy, we'll know. Pelipper with the Choice Scarf is actually pretty relevant there. It's probably going to be a little bit more of an offensive Pelipper. We do have the Archaludon with the Power Herb, so it functions pretty well outside of the rain as well. Sneasler does have the Grassy Seed to pair well with Rillaboom's Grassy Surge, and the Terrain Wars are definitely going to be something to keep an eye on for this matchup. Rillaboom and Indeedee are going to be trading off. The Sneaslers are going to have some, a little bit of aggression towards each other. Notably, Julian's Sneasler is going to have that physical defense boost, while David's is going to have that special defense boost. So that's going to be a big, or Davide. So that's going to be a big contention point, I think. Notably, Sneasler is not going to be able to, doesn't do too great into Indeedee and Espathra for Julian, and for Davide, you're pretty good bringing the Sneasler in. I think the only matchup that struggles against a little bit is Goldengo, but you do have that Throat Chop. And so coming into match number 1 here, we have Archaludon and Sneasler for Julian, and we have that Espathra and Indeedee for Davide. So a pretty early aggressive start for both players here. That said, I do think Davide, we have the Follow Me from the Indeedee that will give Espathra a chance to just go very aggressive very, very quickly. Can send out Dazzling Gleams, can send out Expanding Forces. You do have that Psychic Terrain. The main thing you do have to worry about as Davide is that Rillaboom coming on to the battlefield, and I think that's exactly what we're going to see. The Archaludon's going to swap out. I believe we're going to see the Rillaboom come in and trigger the Grassy Seed. Yeah. Rillaboom comes in. Grassy Seed is going to trigger for that Sneasler up its physical defensive stats, and we could see a Terrasalization as well for Julian, just to make sure that Sneasler does get a good defensive boost here. I really don't think we are going to see a swap from the Sneasler. You would lose out on that Grassy Seed. And we are seeing a Terrasalization coming through here. Again, I do believe that this is Julian's. I don't remember exactly what the Sneasler's Terra was. It is that Terra Dark, so immune to Psychic type damage, and additionally buffing up any Throat Chop damage that might be coming out here. Now, we did see Davide go for the Follow Me on the Indeedee. That's going to redirect any attacks into it, and it's going to give this Espathra some free reign to do as it pleases. That Throat Chop is going to come out. It's going to do some solid damage into the Indeedee, but I don't know if it's going to, not quite enough to KO it, and Sneasler is going to take Rocky Helmet damage from this. Now, Espathra gets to do whatever it wants, and it's actually a Dazzling Gleam that comes through. It's going to be super effective on the Sneasler. It doesn't do very much into the Rillaboom, but since that Sneasler went for the Terra Dark, that is a very, very effective hit. And now Espathra is going to get a speed boost here to make it just a little bit faster. I do think with Unburden, Sneasler still should be quicker if you are Julian, and you do have the ability to go for Fake Out on the Rillaboom. But this Espathra is going to be a threat. You do have to deal with it relatively soon or try to force it off the field if you are Julian. Indeedee does not have much longer. If you are Davide, I think you want to try to get Psychic Terrain set back up. There might be a swap from the Indeedee. If you do want to sacrifice it, I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world, but you brought a Sneasler of your own, which I don't think is out of the question. I know we probably just saw the Pokemon and I forgot it, but Sneasler coming in could be pretty relevant here. It does good work into our Chaladon. It does great work into Rillaboom. So I think that is something that Davide is going to be considering, is that Sneasler coming in and trying to get that Psychic Terrain set up so that you can activate your own Psychic Seed. But Hydreigon is what actually makes its way onto the battlefield. Espather does go for that Protect here, that Fake Out Pressure being pretty big, all things considered. But we do not see that Fake Out come through. It is Close Combat from the Sneasler, which KOs this Hydreigon in one shot. Julian calling the switch there. Davide does have to sacrifice the Hydreigon essentially to get Indeedee back onto the battlefield and triggering that Psychic Terrain. Woodhammer comes through, but it's just going into that Protect. It would have done quite a bit of damage, but Espather now gets a double speed boost here. The question is it faster than Sneasler yet? I still don't think so, and that Grassy Terrain is slowly healing up that initial damage that came through. So Espather with a double speed boost, Sneasler still without Unburden, feeling pretty strong, and we do see Sneasler for Davide in the back with that Psychic Seed. So Indeedee comes back out onto the battlefield, overwrites the terrain. There's no Grassy Glide priority. Notably, there's no other relevant priority moves coming out of Julian right now. We could very well see that Rillaboom swap out, but Woodhammer is still a very effective move, and Rillaboom does still do plenty of damage into both the Espather and the Indeedee. A Woodhammer into the Espather is going to do a lot. The main thing you have to worry about if you are Davide, or if you are Julian, is Davide's Expanding Force hitting Rillaboom really, really hard. That said, right now, Sneasler is not under threat of the Expanding Force at all. Espather cannot go for a Protect. The only thing that you really have to worry about coming out from Davide is a Follow Me on the Indeedee. That's exactly what we see. Julian does not go for the swap here. Seems like might be pretty okay with sacrificing the Sneasler in this situation. Throat Chop coming through that is going to KO the Indeedee, and then Rillaboom is going to get a pretty much free shot onto the Espather here. That is a critical hit, and it is not useful at all. The Rocky Helmet damage into the Sneasler, I don't think is going to be all that relevant. Again, I imagine we're going to see the Dazzling Gleam coming through from the Espather to guarantee that the Sneasler goes down. That's exactly what happens, but now Rillaboom gets a free shot with that Woodhammer. Okay, another critical hit that I once again believe did not matter onto that Sneasler. Rillaboom here has a free shot of Woodhammer onto the Espather. I am incredibly intrigued to see how much damage this is going to do. It could be just absolutely nothing, and it could be quite a lot, and it is enough to take the Espather down. So this puts Julian into a really good spot. 3v1 up against the Sneasler. You have the physical attacker with your Rillaboom here, and it's Sneasler coming out on the battlefield. It is going to be a special defense boost, and Unburden is going to trigger. But with our Chaladon and Rillaboom both on the battlefield here, Rillaboom almost certainly has high horsepower. Again, didn't get quite a chance to look at the moveset there, but if Rillaboom does have high horsepower, then this is almost going to be all said and done for Davide. You do have Dire Claw, you do have Close Combat. Both of Julian's Pokemon are susceptible to the Sneasler that's on the battlefield right now, but Julian goes ahead, swaps out the Rillaboom, understands that being able to get Fake Out up on the next turn could be very, very big, and Incineroar actually comes out onto the battlefield as well. So laying down an Intimidate, getting Fake Out once again available up against the Sneasler. Dire Claw comes through. It does over half to this instant. Another critical hit and a paralysis off of that Dire Claw. This is how Davide can get back into this game. Electroshock comes through for the Duraludon here. Julian does have to worry about Close Combat potentially if Incineroar stays paralyzed. But that being said, our Chaladon is an incredibly bulky Pokemon. And honestly, with Power Herb, a lot of times it's going to be a sturdy one. And with that power, it is going to go ahead. Hold on. I'm crossing my wires here. Electroshot with the Power Herb gets to go off in one turn. Davide says, all right, that's going to be it for game number 1. But the big thing is, I imagine that if you are a Power Herb Duraludon, your ability is normally going to be sturdy instead of stamina quite as often. You're a little less bulky overall, and you're a little bit more aggressive. So Julian making some good calls there, being able to swap in Rillaboom at the right time, and overall winning the terrain war at the right time. Obviously, Psychic Terrain was still there at the end of the day, but when you have the ability to swap in Rillaboom, get good damage out, continually erase that grassy terrain, and making a very, very good call that Indeedee was going to swap out to try to get Psychic Terrain set back up, and going for a much higher damaging move in Close Combat into that slot instead of something like Throat Chop, that feels pretty darn good as a call. Going into the next game, I think if you are Davide, Arcanine is still a relevant Pokemon that can do a lot of work into both Rillaboom and our Chaladon. It's an aggressive Pokemon. It has good damage. Mirror Herb is not nothing by any means, but we'll have to see. Espather is still a really strong Pokemon, and we saw it almost single-handedly win previous matches. So coming into game number 2, what adjustments have been made? Our Chaladon and Sneasler on the battlefield this time around for Julian, and once again Indeedee and Espather for Davide. So I believe this is a very similar leads for both players here. Davide's is the exact same. I think Julian's is also the exact same. So once again, we could be seeing the exact same play out as game number 1, and notably, the Arcanine is in the back. That is something that we did not see before, was the Hydreigon. Now, Arcanine is still very susceptible to close combat. That will still take a ton of damage from it, but it is a very strong Pokemon. Still, you can get a defense boost from that Sneasler if you have the Mirror Herb, and overall, you have good damage. You have very versatile damage. So, for Julian, I think it's relatively safe to make the same play as before. Swap out into Rillaboom with the Archaludon. Sneasler go for a Throat Chop with the Terra Dark. I do think you have to worry a little bit about taking super effective fairy type damage again, but we'll have to see it later. Davide does swap the Arcanine in. That is going to be an Intimidate that lays down onto the Sneasler. Now, notably, Indeedee should be the slowest Pokemon on the field, so I don't think Julian is going for a swap. No, we are not getting a swap here. Julian instead going for the Terastallization again. Looks like it's going to be the Sneasler one more time, going into that Terra Dark. Again, susceptible to a Dazzling Gleam, but not 4 times weak against a Expanding Force or a Lumina Crash. We do see the Throat Chop come through, and it is not going to get redirected. It's going straight into the Espathra here, and it does more than enough damage to take it down. So Espathra gone, Arcanine on the battlefield, and our Archaludon is going to get some damage off here. Are we going to see the Electro Shot? It's going to be the Dragon Pulse. So this should still do quite a bit of damage. Arcanine is relatively tanky, though, down to a little bit over half HP. There's Psychic Terrain still on the battlefield, so Sneasler for Davide can come in, trigger that Psychic Seed, and be moving incredibly swiftly. This Unburden now being triggered for Davide means his Sneasler is currently the fastest thing on the field. Julian would have to swap the Archaludon out to allow his own Sneasler to get that speed boost. Now, close combat is the #1 threat for Davide. You can throw that into Archaludon or into the Sneasler. Both of them are weak to dark type moves right now, and the Archaludon is in a very pressured spot. It cannot Terastallize away from this steel typing to get rid of the fighting weakness. It is going to have to swap out if it does not want to take a ton of damage right now. If you are Julian, I think you can make a pretty good call of going for close combat into the Arcanine, but that is still going to probably come at the sacrifice of one of your Pokemon. The question becomes, do you want to sacrifice the Archaludon, or do you want to sacrifice something else? Because Davide has a very clear double up into that slot. Archaludon does not very likely does not have Protect. It is very uncommon for that Pokemon to run Protect. We do see a Terastallization coming through for Davide. It is going to be the Arcanine going into Terra Water here. That is incredibly dangerous if Julian made the call that was going to happen and you have a potential Electro Shot, but it does take away that super effective close combat from Sneasler. Davide does go for the close combat on his end. The Sturdy does indeed trigger, and Arcanine is going to be the next, and Julian Sneasler is going to be the next Pokemon to move, is I imagine. Yeah, close combat comes through. It's not going to be super effective, and it takes Arcanine down to 5 HP. That is incredible. Arcanine's going to be able to get an attack off here. This should take out the Archaludon really, relatively cleanly, or yeah, incredibly cleanly. It does decrease Davide's stats on his own Arcanine, but I think this is an okay spot for Davide to be in. This does give Julian a clean switch in of whichever Pokemon he wants, but if Rillaboom comes in right now, that is only going to trigger his Sneasler's Grassy Seed. That should result in both Sneasler's speed tying, but it will allow Davide to swap in Indeedee again, reset the Psychic Terrain, stop a potential Fake Out from happening, and it is going to be the Incineroar coming in. I do like this play from Julian. You don't have Fake Out available, but you get an Intimidate off, and honestly, this is where you can probably go for a swap. Incineroar should be slower than both of Davide's Pokemon here, so it would be the last Pokemon to swap out. That would give you Grassy Terrain back on the battlefield, and it would give you a potential swap back into Incineroar in the next turn to give another decrease in those attack stats for both of these physical attacking Pokemon. Julian is in a spot where if he can take out both of Davide's current Pokemon on the battlefield and leave Indeedee as the last Pokemon standing, Julian should be able to take care of that with either Sneasler or with Incineroar. So, for Davide, you have to make a really tough call here. Are you going to swap in the Indeedee, or are you going to try to go for more damage? Right now, I think it's pretty clear that Rillaboom is going to swap into that Incineroar slot. You can try to go for the Flare Blitz off of the Arcanine to really try to punish that, and go for a close combat from your own Sneasler and hope you win the speed tie, but Julian is actually swapping out the Sneasler here to bring in the Rillaboom. This is going to be Grassy Terrain getting set up, but Incineroar and Rillaboom are the two Pokemon on the field this time around. This does mean that Fake Out is available if Davide doesn't switch, but Arcanine is slower than Sneasler, so it switches out later. Indeedee comes back onto the battlefield and resets the psychic terrain. There is going to be no fake out here. For Julian, swapping out the Sneasler means that there is not a guaranteed psychic terrain on the battlefield, or there's not a guaranteed grassy terrain on the battlefield. Sneasler does go for Protect for Davide. Incineroar went for the Flare Blitz into that slot, so no damage coming through on this turn. Indeedee now has the ability to redirect damage, and Sneasler can be incredibly aggressive into either of Julian's Pokemon here. There is no Terastallization to escape this. Incineroar is going to take super effective damage, and Sneasler, if it wants to swap in, would also still take super effective damage in this slot. Right now, Incineroar is an incredibly strong Pokemon. It is usually quite bulky. You can train it to survive Sneasler close combats, especially after a single Intimidate, but it is still going to take a ton of damage from this point. Right now, Rillaboom has to get some good work done, but mainly you need to try to take out this Sneasler. You don't want to leave David with two aggressive good options. Unfortunately, Indeedee has Follow Me, which means Julian is going to have to attack it no matter what until Indeedee goes down. Close combat goes into the Incineroar, takes it down into the yellow. Incineroar takes it relatively well. This is a spot where you can go for a potential Flare Blitz or a Parting Shot, but high horsepower comes through into the Indeedee and does not do nearly enough damage. It is a critical hit, which is honestly a little bit impressive. The Rocky Helmet damage into the Rillaboom could be pretty big later in the turn, but Flare Blitz come through from the instant, taking Indeedee down to 24 HP. This isn't over yet, but Incineroar, taking continuous damage from the recoil, from Flare Blitz, from Rocky Helmet, just barely survives. We'll be going down to whatever Sneasler throws out at it. This unfortunately means that Incineroar is pretty much guaranteed to go down. Davide's only Pokemon that's going to fall is going to be Indeedee, and Julian is still going to be in a 2v2, but it is going to be a Sneasler and an Arcanine with an Intimidate laid down onto Julian's Pokemon. That should result in David winning things out, having that stronger Sneasler at the end of the day. Indeedee does go for Follow Me here. Rillaboom, we did see was the Pokemon that moved first between the two, but close combat into the Incineroar again will take it down. Rillaboom's going to be able to close up with this Indeedee relatively easily, and Sneasler is getting continuously weaker in terms of its defensive stats, so it will go down to a stiff breeze, and Arcanine is at incredibly low HP. Grassy Glide does come through, but it's not a priority move. There is no grassy terrain right now, so Indeedee is going to fall. That's going to mean we get Arcanine back onto the battlefield here. Notably, though, Julian never got to proc Unburden on this Sneasler, so Sneasler for Julian is going to be slower than Davide's. So that very well will just mean that Sneasler for Julian is just going to have to take a close combat and deal with it. And that means Julian is going to have to hope that this Rillaboom can get enough damage out onto the Arcanine and the Sneasler to get things done. But both Pokemon have close combat. I think this is just checkmate for Davide. You can close combat into the opposing Sneasler. You can Dire Claw into the opposing Rillaboom. I think that should be more than enough to close things out, because even if you don't get the attack off into the opposing Sneasler, even if your Arcanine goes down, your Sneasler is still incredibly strong, should be able to do more than enough damage. You'll be able to KO the Rillaboom first, and then you should be able to move fast enough to take out the opposing Sneasler. The question becomes, for Julian, who are you attacking? You have to make a smart call here. I think, okay, so in the scenario that Davide attacks 1 and 1, Sneasler should move before the Arcanine. It will not move before the opposing Sneasler, and it is going to be close combat from Davide into the opposing Sneasler. That is going to be the option. That's going to guarantee the KO. I don't think the critical hit mattered. There have been a ton of crits in this series, and I do not think they mattered at all. This does mean Davide gets to go for Flare Blitz with his Arcanine into the Rillaboom. If Arcanine is fast enough, it should be, I think Julian would have to invest a Wood Hammer to try to KO the Arcanine here, but Arcanine is fast enough. It does get the Flare Blitz off. This is going to do a lot of damage. It does more than enough, and we're going to a game number 3. A very exciting back and forth matchup there. I think Julian swapping the Sneasler out for Rillaboom as opposed to swapping the Incineroar out for a Rillaboom gave Davide an opening back into the game. I think there's a world where that could have worked. That could have been a good play, but with Indeedee swapping in that same turn, swapped by the Arcanine swapping out, you guarantee that Psychic Terrain is still going to go up. You still don't have that fake out pressure, and things become a much more difficult. You can't swap Incineroar in again to reduce the Sneasler's physical attack again. So I think that was a little bit of a slip up from Julian. So coming into game number 3, I liked Davide's plan. I also like the Arcanine being there. I thought it was much more aggressive. It's bulkier than the Hydreigon. Intimidate is a really good, ability to have against a very physical team that Julian is bringing. So coming into this game number 3, I like both players' strategies for this matchup, I think Julian could play a little bit tighter, and that would make that game even a little bit closer. So coming into game number 3, let's see what we've got. Sneasler and Archaladon for Julian, and Sneasler and Arcanine for Davide, changing it up for game number 3. These are two Pokemon that we've seen previously. Davide thinks both of them are pretty relevant, and once again, that double close combat is a pretty strong option for Davide right now. There is no terrain on the battlefield. That is pretty big. And so whoever swaps first likely has a terrain setter in the back. Again, both of these Sneaslers have those Psychic and Grassy Seeds respectively. So seeing those, that implies that those terrain setters are still going to be on the way. That said, Sneasler is still an incredibly fast and strong Pokemon without those, those unburdened stat doubles. But all things considered, we're going to see some aggression here, I believe, from Davide. Julian does go for the swap out here. Incineroar makes its way onto the battlefield. I think this is a smart move. Reduce the physical attacks of both of these Pokemon. However, this is now a Dark type that's on the battlefield here. Both of these Pokemon for Julian are currently weak to close combat. We do see the Terastallization again. I believe this is from Julian. That it's going to be the Archaladon going into, I think it's the Terra Electric. It is that Terra Electric. So Terra Electric Electro Shot will be a one-turn move with that special attack increase. It should be able to do quite a lot of damage. And there is no special defense boost on that Sneasler, but there is a Protect on the Sneasler. Arcanine now going to be the Pokemon to get aggressive. Never mind, no aggression here. Double Protect, that's all it is. So Julian potentially is going to get a special attack boost from this Power Herb, but Electro Shot will still be a one-turn move. That Power Herb will still get eaten up, and Protect on both these Pokemon will block that damage. That said, Incineroar is on the battlefield now. It does have access to Fake Out. Sneasler is the most obvious target for that. However, with that Psychic Terrain still being an option on the battlefield, this is going to be a pretty tough call for Julian. We do see that Mirror Herb triggering from Arcanine, seeing that stat increase, so Arcanine's special attack gets boosted. That's probably the least important stat for Arcanine to get boosted in this entire matchup. So for Julian, you are no longer weak to close combat. That's going to be a really nice thing over the course of these next few turns, but you're not going to get another one-turn Electro Shot off unless you have Pelipper in the back, which we have not seen so far. Again, I imagine we are still going to see that Rillaboom coming through. For Davide, you now have to consider how much damage do you want to try to do into this Archaladon versus this Incineroar. We do see a swap out here. Indeedee makes its way onto the battlefield here, swapping out the Sneasler, but this does shut off Fake Out pressure from the Incineroar. If you are Julian, you can potentially still try to go for Fake Out into that Indeedee slot. Never mind, we're not going to see it. Flare Blitz comes through into the Archaladon, does about a third of its HP. Incineroar is going to get to move here. It's going to go for a damaging move, and Archaladon likely going to go for a more aggressive option in that Dragon Pulse. It is +1 special attack. Indeedee going down to about 1/3 of its HP, and Incineroar going for the Parting Shot instead. I like this move from Julian. Now, what I was saying is Julian did have the option potentially to go for Fake Out into that Sneasler slot. It would do nothing in Psychic Terrain, but it would guarantee that that slot doesn't move. However, I like this play. If you are expecting that Sneasler to swap out, then going for a Parting Shot here, or honestly, even if you're expecting the Arcanine to swap out, going for a Parting Shot there, you know your Incineroar survives that close combat, and that can allow you to swap into Rillaboom and overwrite the terrain. It's going to give you at least one turn of still being able to apply Fake Out pressure to Davide's Pokemon. Now, for Davide, you do still have the ability to Terastallize. I don't think you want to Terastallize your Arcanine in the face of this Rillaboom right now. This is going to be a lot of pressure put on it, but later in the game, you could still Terastallize any of your Pokemon. That is still a very viable option, especially if you are able to deal with this Rillaboom relatively cleanly. Indeedee, down to about 2/3 HP. We do know that it should go down to another Dragon Pulse. That should be more than enough to get, to clean it up. But notably, the Rillaboom having access to Fake Out means that Arcanine is basically guaranteed to not move this turn. If you are Davide, you might be able to take this opportunity to try to swap the Arcanine out into something else. Probably not the Sneasler. You aren't going to trigger your Psychic Seed, and you don't really want to risk your Sneasler taking too much damage, but whatever Pokemon number 4 is, which we did see was the Hydreigon. So Davide, much more aggressive on this game plan overall in this matchup. Now, Julian is probably still playing pretty aggressively here. I think you do really want to try to take out this Indeedee. You would prefer Grassy Terrain stay set up, so one, that the Sneasler doesn't get unburdened and that special defense boost doesn't come through. Hydreigon, though, makes its way onto the battlefield, and Julian makes the call to swap out. Again, these are layered calls, y'all. Incineroar making his way back out on the battlefield. That is going to be Fake Out pressure once again applied on the next turn, so Hydreigon is not going to be able to move, all things considered. Now, who is the Archaladon attacking? That is a good question. Indeedee going for the Protect here. Davide noting that Julian is probably seeing that Indeedee as the #1 threat, and Dragon Pulse just going into that Protect. So a very, very good turn for Davide overall, but Julian making sure that things do not slide too far out of his favor, with Incineroar making its way onto the battlefield. Intimidate, not too big of an option right now, but that fake out is going to be relevant. So Davide can still guarantee that Indeedee is fine, or that Hydreigon is fine on this turn by going for a follow me. But again, this is another spot that Julian is continuing to apply pressure essentially, and can still send out, swap out for Rillaboom here. At the same time, if you're Julian, you might just want to go for Parting Shot into the Hydreigon, hoping that you can get enough work out from this Archaludon. We could very well see Dragon Pulse from this Archaludon into the Hydreigon, even if it does get followed me into the Indeedee. I think if you're Julian, you are okay with that either way. Indeedee is going to swap out, though. There's not going to be redirection here. Davide sending out the Arcanine that is going to reduce the Incineroar's physical attack stat by a relatively respectable amount. But where are these attacks going? This is going to be the Terastallization now for Davide, saving it for this Hydreigon here, going into Terra Ghost notably. So Julian not really wanting, probably not even wanting to risk the fake out into that Terra Ghost. Let's be fully real here. So what attacks are we going to see? The Draco Meteor comes out from the Hydreigon. This is going to do quite a bit of work, and it takes out the Archaludon that does drop Hydreigon's special attack considerably. But what is Julian doing as an adjustment here? Now, I will say notably, we're quite a few turns into this game, and that is the first KO. There's been plenty of damage otherwise, but the knockoff comes through onto the Hydreigon, but it does not do nearly enough to KO. It takes Hydreigon down below half HP, knocks out the safety goggles, but Hydreigon is going to be getting grassy terrain recovery. That Arcanine Intimidate, I think, really putting in the work there. Sneasler makes its way onto the battlefield now. That is going to trigger the Grassy Seed, so it's going to get a little bit of a defensive boost, and it's going to be very, very speedy here. So no more huge priority for Julian, but this Arcanine is under quite a bit of threat. Close combat is certainly an option that this Sneasler can go for. With Hydreigon at -2 on the special attack side for that Draco Meteor, it's not going to be doing quite as much damage. It's still a threat. It still has a respectable special attack stat, even at -2. But if you are Davide, getting that Hydreigon swapped out here sooner rather than later is a major priority. If you are Julian, the Arcanine is still in the field. It's still going to be a major threat. Close combat is still an option that it has into that Incineroar slot. It can also go for Flare Blitz. Arcanine just has really good answers into both Incin and Rillaboom, and that's a problem that Julian has to try to address. Sneasler is still going to be able to do quite a bit of work. Notably, again, Indeedee is at relatively low HP. Hydreigon's at relatively low HP. We do see the swap out from Davide. Julian has an HP advantage overall, but needs to get on an aggressive level here. Psychic Terrain does come out now. That is going to make sure that, again, no priority moves come through, but I don't think that's going to matter all that much for Julian, and it is going to be a Throat Chop into the Hydreigon, taking it down. So are we going to see something like a Parting Shot, or are we going to see Flare Blitz or Knockoff into that Indeedee slot? Flare Blitz, I think, would be an incredible call, but it's probably just going to be a Parting Shot. It is just going to be that Parting Shot into the Indeedee. Rillaboom's going to come back out onto the battlefield, and once again, we are going to get Grassy Terrain set up, meaning that Davide's Psychic Seed on his own Sneasler is still not going to be triggered, and Unburden for Julian will retain the fastest Sneasler. All right. Notably as well, priority still active. This is a good spot to bring Arcanine in again. You do have to worry about fake out pressure, but you get another Intimidate out. Julian would have to swap out his own Sneasler there to get rid of that -1 and get that damage fully online again. But bring in your own Sneasler. You do still have some good aggression. You do well into opposing Rillabooms, but Julian, I think right now, has the upper hand, having 2 aggressive Pokemon on the battlefield while having the ability to go for a fake out, go for Grassy Glide as well, even, is going to be pretty big, all things considered. Again, you're in a spot where if Julian can get rid of both the Sneasler and the Arcanine, Incineroar should be able to win the 1v1 versus the Indeedee. But that being said, Indeedee is a great Pokemon at not letting that happen with stuff like Follow Me. Rillaboom does not want to take a Dire Claw, but it is fine going for a fake out on this turn. If you are Julian, I don't know if you want to try to go for close combat onto the Indeedee, if you want to try to go for Dire Claw potentially. I think this is honestly a turn where you don't necessarily want to KO the Indeedee right away. I think you want to let it survive a turn so that potentially, hopefully on the next turn, you can get good damage onto both Pokemon and try to take a double KO somehow. But Indeedee actually goes for the helping hand on Sneasler. Close combat into the Indeedee, takes it out outright. That is going to drop Sneasler's defense and special defense for Julian here. That does make it relatively vulnerable, especially with that Rocky Helmet damage. Davide's own Sneasler going for potential close combat or something along those lines could do more than enough to KO it from this point. Close combat does come through, goes into the Rillaboom though, not a Dire Claw, and Rillaboom goes down. That does guarantee the KO. So Incineroar is going to come out onto the battlefield now, but it's going to be Arcanine and Incineroar versus or I'm sorry, it's going to be Arcanine and Sneasler versus Incineroar and Sneasler here. The main thing for this, though, normally Incineroar, one of the strongest Pokemon of all time, you do still have Fake Out as an available option, but for Davide, with the Arcanine coming out onto the battlefield, Arcanine is a great Pokemon up against Incineroar. It does get in the Intimidate off. Both players are going to get Intimidate on both sides, but Arcanine, with that Rock typing, is incredibly strong against Incineroar. These Sneasers are what make things so interesting, though. Grassy Terrain does still have several more turns of recovery, and technically, Davide has a little bit of the health advantage over Julian, but Julian has that physical defense boost from the Grassy Seed, so that should just about neutral out. Right now, for Julian, you have to figure out who you are going to go for the Fake Out into. Both of Davide's Pokemon have Protect, and this is probably a turn that you could go for it. It is going to, it is going to sack you. You're going to give a little bit more healing over to Julian Sneasler, and overall, that could very well be what defines this game, is that Grassy Seed defense boost. Takeout comes through. We do get to see who Julian was trying to target with this. It is going to be the Arcanine. So prioritizing stopping the Arcanine from moving in close combat, I believe, probably going into Arcanine as well. Yeah, that would have been super effective damage. You would have been able to get the KO. Probably would have resulted in a 1v2 for Davide. But this is the key turn here. Neither Pokemon for Davide can protect. Julian can get guaranteed hits on both of them outside. Well, I guess if Davide wants to go for a 50-50 protect, but I do not think that that is a path to victory for Davide. So Incineroar does have knockoff right now. You can knockoff on Arcanine will not do as much damage. Knockoff onto Sneasler will knock off the Psychic Seed to get some additional damage. I think Flare Blitz into the Sneasler would be the higher damaging move and probably better overall. Arcanine likely goes down to a close combat from Julian Sneasler, but I don't know if it's guaranteed. This is a spot where Julian could double up into the Arcanine, but you have to worry a little bit about how much damage Davide Sneasler does into your own. Incineroar does not win a 1v1 into Davide Sneasler. We do see the close combat from Julian here. Takes Arcanine down to 11 HP. It is not down yet. And notably, with Julian Sneasler moving first, it is actually going to be more vulnerable than Davide Sneasler. Incineroar goes down into the yellow HP. Is this going to be enough? Incineroar has to go for it right now. Needs to try to KO the Arcanine. It is going to be close combat into Incineroar, though. Arcanine moves before the Incin, and that does more than enough work to take it down. Julian, okay, the game is still not over, but the game is still not over yet. The game is still not over yet. Julian Sneasler does still have the defense advantage over Davide's Sneasler. With a little bit of Grassy Terrain Restoration, that does put Julian Sneasler up at full HP. Both Sneaslers at full health. Julian has to take 2 KOs here back to back without losing his own Sneasler. Close combat for Julian into Davide Sneasler, I think, is probably your best bet. I think that is what you have to go for. Davide could also go for an incredibly risky call here of a Protect on one Pokemon. You could also go for double Protect here if you are Davide. Again, get a little bit more, scout out a little bit more of what you think Julian is going to do. It's not like Grassy Terrain is going to heal them up anymore. But the question is, does Arcanine KO Sneasler from this spot? I believe it has been 2 close combats for Julian Sneasler. Julian actually goes for a Protect of his own here, notably. So you are going to get to see what Davide is going for. It is going to be that Dire Claw, and it is going to be Arcanine going for another attack. Imagine a Flare Blitz, something along. Yeah, it is going to be that Flare Blitz. I think the thing for Julian is that this Arcanine probably has enough damage to take out Julian Sneasler. That is the tough call at the end of the day. If Julian's close combat had just barely enough damage to do it, to KO the Arcanine, then this game, I think, would have been pretty much done. The big question, though, is does Arcanine have enough damage right now on its own with a -1 from Intimidate to KO Julian's Sneasler? That is the big question. So essentially, what it comes down to, does a -1 defense Sneasler survive a Flare Blitz? That's essentially where we're at with the map. The close combat comes through. I think this is exactly what you have to do, but it does not KO Julian Sneasler, does not KO Davide Sneasler, and that should be it. Sneasler should take a lot of damage from the Dire Claw here, down to half HP. Arcanine should be able to do more than enough here, and it even Julian Sneasler even takes a nap here, a little bit premature, but Flare Blitz comes through. This should be more than enough to KO it, and Julian Freund loses in that top cut. Davide career going on to the top 8. That was an incredibly close match. I think a very smart call for that double Protect for Davide, and again, just some attack rolls, I think, ended up deciding that. But I think in game 2, I think Julian had a better way to play that. But in that game number 3, felt very tight, felt very close, was very fun, a very well played match overall from both players. Until next time, y'all, be safe, be smart, make wise decisions, and farewell.